We also continue to follow some breaking news. Representatives for former President Trump tell CBS News that 2 charges have been dismissed in his election interference case out of Georgia. Those counts are related to conspiracy and filing false documents. Fulton County DA Fani Willis has declined to comment. Earlier this year, Judge Scott McAfee dropped 3 other charges. There was actually at one point 6 charges that McAfee had called too vague. Trump is now facing 8 counts in the case to which he has pleaded not guilty. There are 14 other co-defendants. They have also pleaded not guilty. Let's bring in CBS News legal contributor and Loyola Law School professor Jessica Levinson. Jessica, there's a lot of cases. There are a lot of charges. It is hard at points to keep all of them straight. Explain what, first of all, the former president is facing now in Georgia. And then let's get into more of the news about why these charges might have been dropped.
Great questions. And it is starting to get, I think, to the extent it wasn't already complicated for people. This is the state case, the Georgia state case dealing with election interference. And the question that we're talking about today is how many of the charges in that state case can move forward. As you laid out very clearly, this is not our first time having a similar conversation. Previously, the judge had tossed some of the counts there, essentially saying they were vague. The prosecution decided not to refile, finding that those were largely duplicative, kind of a belt and suspenders approach, and they had enough to move forward. Today is different. This isn't about charges that are vague or where Trump doesn't have warning. Today, what the judge is saying in a 22-page ruling is that the prosecution does not have jurisdiction and the judge does not have jurisdiction in a state case over charges dealing with filing false statements in federal court. And so what it boils down to, as I'm reading it quickly, is the proper form for those counts that the judge is dismissing is a federal courthouse. And so when it comes to the rest of the case, the crux of this case dealing with state RICO charges, and again, state charges based on trying to undermine the 2020 election, those charges stay intact.
And so just to make sure that we are all clear on this, the judge wasn't dismissing this with prejudice because of any of the underlying facts of the case, except to say that these charges belong in federal court if it in fact is a crime, which is something that is being litigated and the former president has said he is not guilty of. But given that, is this a victory then for Donald Trump and his legal team?
Oh, without a doubt, it is a victory to the extent that if you are facing 10 charges in the morning and then you are facing 8 charges in the afternoon, it's a good day for you. So what we're seeing here is it's not a good day for the prosecution, not because they didn't have enough evidence, but because what the judge is saying here is, you filed this in the wrong place. It's like going to, for lack of a better way of describing it, going to a restaurant where they serve Indonesian food and saying, and now I want Mexican food. You're in the wrong place for what you're asking for here. And what the judge has said is basically not in my courthouse. I don't have the power to adjudicate those claims. Now, with respect to, this doesn't change anything about the facts alleged. It doesn't change anything about the rest of the case that we talked about, which is that RICO case, again, essentially the conspiracy by trying to create slates of fake electors, et cetera, to undermine the election. That stays intact. But without a doubt, this is a victory for the Trump team.
Jessica, by the way, that restaurant analogy, so helpful for people who are not legal experts to understand exactly why the judge would throw those particular charges, which were counts 15 and 27, out by saying that they belonged in federal court, not in Judge Scott McAfee's courtroom. But this case in particular has been so plagued by questions of impropriety given the DA, Fani Willis, and the allegations that she had an improper relationship with a member of her team. And then with the judge earlier throwing out other charges for being too vague, now saying that these are in the wrong place, that they belong in a federal courthouse, not in Georgia state court. All of this, does that signal trouble for the prosecution? Should they have charged all of this differently? Is it hurting them to have overcharged this case?
Well, I mean, I think yes, yes, and yes, to the extent that you never want to be a prosecutor who filed a bunch of charges and then has some of those charges thrown out and then also is almost tossed off the case based on a hearing related to conflicts of interest. Now, whether or not this indicates that if this case goes forward, if the rest of the case goes forward, that Fani Willis can or can't win, that's a different question. But look, who the prosecutor is, the decision she made, both in her personal life and with respect to the charges that were filed, is allowing Trump to have these pre-trial wins.
So, Jessica, there are still other charges that face the former president and his co-defendants. What about those charges? What remain? How serious are they?
Well, they're serious charges. They are, again, state criminal charges that in many ways are the state mirror of the federal charges in the D.C. election interference case. And the state charges deal with trying to basically improperly undermine the results of the election in Georgia. But the way, as I remember it, the way that the case is charged, it actually allows the prosecution to sweep in actions by others by saying that there was this organized conspiracy to undermine the results in Georgia. So for this case, again, the basis of it has to start with Georgia. And a big part of the case could be, to refresh a lot of people's recollection, that famous phone call between former President Trump and the Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, where he's saying to Brad Raffensperger, can't we just find 11,000 plus votes? But it's not just that call, it's other actions. Now, at the risk of overly complicating things, that's the part of the case that's going to move forward. But I do want to remind everybody that in June, the Supreme Court came out with that big immunity decision where they said when it comes to a former president or a current president, you are immune from criminal prosecution for actions that fall within your official duties. And part of the Georgia case is going to have to be sifting through, just like the judge in the DC case, sifting through which potential charges cannot move forward because of immunity issues.
All right. We're going to put a pin in that as I bring in CBS News campaign reporter and attorney Katrina Kaufman, who is following this case for us, as well as the Trump campaign. Katrina, I'd like to ask you a little bit more about what we have been hearing in the past about these cases, as well as all of the legal troubles that the former president has been facing, and how all of that's been playing out on the campaign trail.
You know, I've been out talking to people at Trump's rallies, and what's interesting is I think that his rhetoric about his legal troubles really resonates with them. They see these as him being politically persecuted by the Democrats, the fact that he's been convicted on 34 felony charges in New York really doesn't seem to be swaying their vote or impact their perception of him.
So if the former president being convicted doesn't affect them, does the fact that these charges are being thrown out, previously we saw that happen, and we're now learning of additional charges being thrown out, does that vindicate in their minds what the former president has been saying?
Absolutely. I think that Trump frames these as a win. And what's important here is that, you know, this is not the judge dismissing these charges on the merits. He's not saying that due to the facts of this case that these charges can't be brought. As you and Jessica were talking about, he's just saying that this is the wrong forum. These are not charges that should be brought by the state. These are charges that should be brought in federal court and assessed there.
And Katrina, we're talking about how these cases have also come in a very odd twist as the former president is both running for re-election and denying the election results that happened in 2020. We've heard more of that on the campaign trail recently. What is happening in terms of reconciling the president or the former president running now for office again with, as just a reminder, with some of these cases as well as sentencing and how some of that has been pushed because of the election?
Yeah, so we were actually supposed to have a sentencing in the New York criminal case against Trump coming up that was going to be on September 18th. And just last week, we got a very significant decision from the judge, Juan Merchan. He has decided that he's pushing the sentencing until after the election. And even though, these judges say they don't want to take politics into account when they're weighing these cases, he just said that he felt as though he didn't want to seem as though he was influencing the election in any way. So that date is going to now happen later in November. He's also weighing a very significant appeal by Trump to overturn that conviction altogether on the basis of the Supreme Court's immunity ruling. Trump says that based on that immunity ruling, all 34 counts that he was convicted of should be thrown out. But it's important that the judge pushed that decision too. We were going to get it on September 16th. Now we won't find out until November 12th. So Trump will still go into this election as a convicted felon.
All right. As you can see there for all of our viewers, we are watching to see when Trump is going to hold that campaign rally. Let's bring back Jessica Levinson. Jessica, as you heard Katrina talking about that immunity ruling that came down from the Supreme Court, and in some ways the vagueness of it, allowing all of these lower court judges some leeway in trying to interpret what the Supreme Court means by presidential immunity. How is that expected to play out?
Well, we're looking at the first judges in the nation who are going to have to apply this new standard. And let's be clear, this happens all the time with Supreme Court cases where the court will hear a case and it's a matter of first impression. It's a constitutional issue. And they say, OK, here's the standard. Now go and apply it. And history indicates that that can sometimes be bumpy. The difference is a lot of times you and I don't talk about it because it doesn't involve a former president, a current candidate, and pending legal charges that could potentially have huge historic implications for our country. So the fact that they laid out the standard that needs interpretation, that's how it goes with the Supreme Court. That's my bread and butter in class talking to students. Mm-hmm. The fact that we need these judges to interpret it, I mean, that is a lot of work for them. For Judge Chutkan, the federal judge in the D.C. election interference case, for Judge McAfee in Georgia, not as much for Judge Merchan in New York. I think those charges will stay.
Jessica, one last question for you. Why now? Because as I was saying, back in March, Judge McAfee tossed out other charges, calling them overly broad. It's not like anything changed with these charges in terms of what he's finding fault in. Why announce this now? Why decide now that these should have been filed federally?
So the answer, I'm going to say, I suspect, is based on when these motions were filed, when the oppositions came in, the reply, and when he ultimately came to his ruling. There may be something else, I want to be transparent, in the court's calendar that dictated the ruling this way. But one thing to keep in mind is not all motions are typically filed at the same time, and judges have enormous discretion as to when to make decisions. And based on what we see generally from these judges, they're not trying to make decisions based on where we are in the electoral calendar. They're trying to make those decisions based on where they are in their court calendars.
Helpful in understanding all of it. Jessica Levinson, as well as Katrina Kaufman, thank you both.